Welcome to Perspectives with Mzu.
Welcome to Perspectives with Mzu. My guest today is Zama Nkosi, who works for a tech startup, a tech company called What Three Words. And she will tell us more about what she does. But she has a very rich experience having worked in the EU, in Brussels. She did work with the EU companies that are looking at doing business in the EU area in the space of international trade and public policy and public affairs. Currently, she works for What Three Words, which is a tech startup. She did her MA at the LSE, is that correct, in politics and international relations. So for our podcast today, we're going to talk about a theme on technology and social dynamics. Welcome, Zama.
Thank you so much, Mzu. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Perhaps we can start off by you telling us more about yourself and what's exciting about working in a tech startup.
Yeah, sure. So I work for What Three Words. I do partnerships for What Three Words in South Africa. We just actually almost a year ago opened our office here in South Africa. And what we're trying to achieve in South Africa is to create an ecosystem for What Three Words and for three-word addresses. Now, you might be wondering, what is What Three Words? What are three-word addresses? So What Three Words is a company that has split up the entire globe into a grid 3 meter by 3 meter squares. And each square is given a unique three-word address. So for instance, at the front door to our office here in Johannesburg is Punk Braved Warriors. So that's what the technology has done. And what our work in South Africa is trying to achieve is to create partnerships with local businesses and also with the government potentially in order for South Africans to be able to benefit from using the system.
Awesome. I'll probably do a follow-up podcast to look in greater detail at the work that you do and what problems Three Words is seeking to solve society. I can think of many, especially the fact that people in rural communities
Absolutely.
don't have a clear address system, and that could have an effect, say, on business, but also just human dignity. That when you have an address, it makes you feel a little bit more empowered. So I'll schedule a podcast to get into details and the work, of course, that you are doing in the African continent and how you've solved these kinds of challenges. One of the things I thought about when I was scheduling this podcast, inspiration for chatting to people like yourself, the fact that this is Women's Month, the month of August. But I was also aware that it can be quite cheesy that, you interview women on Women's Month and you'll raise questions about gender and gender is not just about women, but also about women-men relations. And so it was quite awkward. I did 1 or 2 interviews and I wasn't feeling quite comfortable, but I thought rather I would still interview women and I will continue into September and I will be sensitive in the mix of guests I have in my podcast. But I would then use this opportunity just to profile women in tech, women in business, women in leadership, without raising so much questions to do with gender and sort of kind of give it as a burden to women to answer these questions. Now, tell us about how, as a political science and international relations graduate, has prepared you for a work in a tech startup company, and what does someone who wants to work in tech startup need to have or to do to prepare themselves for this world?
Absolutely. That's a really great question, Zu. So from my end, when I was doing my MA, my MSc at LSE, I really focused on the relationships between business and government, because I often found that some of the policies that were being put in place were not necessarily addressing the business objectives that can actually help a country grow and that can actually meet the social, the society that can create the society that we would like to see. And so a lot of my time was spent thinking and talking to a lot of business people and finding out how exactly they interacted with the South African government in order to make policymaking to our biggest trading partner, which was and is still the European Union. And so from then on, I worked in Brussels, and there I represented various companies and spoke to the European Union institutions. So I spoke to members of parliament, I spoke to member states, I spoke to the people in the European Commission. And really my interest, it was kind of like what I ended up doing aligned a lot with what I was studying as a politics and international relations student. Because as I said, I was really, really interested in this nexus between policymaking and the actual realities of doing business in a country and what that would take. And so I was really, and so my education in understanding politics and understanding society, in understanding really, the objectives of any government, which are to reduce poverty, to make sure that people have jobs, to make sure that we have things like gender equality, that we're working towards these things. But government is certainly not working on these things in a vacuum, that there is this other whole part of the society, which is business, that is part of that mix. And how do then these two parties work together towards achieving the same goals? And I would say, from then on, given my studies and also my interest, that definitely solidly prepared me for working in a tech company, really. Because my everyday job is how does What Three Words as a business position itself in this interesting, dynamic society like South Africa? Not operating in South Africa in a vacuum. We understand inequality, we understand the history of this country, but how do you navigate this, and how do you make sure that you work with government in order to meet the objectives that we all want to see in this country?
Yeah, we'll come back to some of the social issues, but just on a tangent, there's a lot of talk about the industries of the future, and today's students need to study hard sciences, engineering, artificial intelligence, and so on. But more recently, there has been a focus on soft skills, such as judgment, ability to exercise judgment, ability to express empathy, ability to demonstrate leadership, all of which are not so much related to industries of the future or what's often packaged as fourth industrial age. What's your take as a politics and IR graduate? Do you feel that the social sciences and humanities are undervalued still or underrated, and that there is something we need to see in them, that they have a critical role still to play in the future, especially in a tech-driven future?
Yes, for sure. I think humanities can play a huge role in business, certainly. Yeah. Just, as you said, talking about soft skills, but also just the ability to write, right? And the ability to convey ideas in a simple way. Yeah. Because a lot of business is about communication, a lot about relationships, a lot about emotional intelligence, and also understanding the context in which you work. And so all of those kind of skills, which we consider to be soft, are extremely critical in how we do business, but so are obviously the hard skills in the sciences, engineering, etc., that are sort of higher value, more highly valued in our society. And I do think that there is
Just go ahead.
I do think that there is a tendency to undervalue the humanities. Yeah. But as I said, you learn a lot of valuable skills when it comes to business, in that you can write well, you can communicate well, you understand the context, you're not talking in a vacuum, and that sort of thing. And I think those things are so valuable, and can make a business succeed in any context.
Awesome. I mean, I'm already thinking in terms of conceptual and critical skills. And I've also observed a trend where people who move into or who are entrepreneurs in certain sectors don't come from that sector. So they're able to exercise almost an outsider's advantage, but also skills that you may not find in other disciplines, such as so-called hard disciplines. We need both. But I think the role of social sciences and humanities is undervalued. And that leads me to my next question, which is about the high levels of inequality in South Africa, the divides that we still see in the country, race-based inequalities, inequalities within racial groups, youth unemployment, high levels of social marginalization, still the urban rural divide, and and all that underpins it, lack of growth, low business confidence, etc. And large part of this is a legacy from the apartheid past, as well as, of course, institutional failures post 1994. How do you see technology playing a role in overcoming these social deficits?
So I think the inequality challenge in South Africa is definitely a large one. So as you rightly mentioned, we have inequality between genders. We have inequality between youth unemployment and other sections of the society. So there is a lot of marginalization, a lot of exclusion. And I think that the role that technology can play is to make things really, really accessible for people. To make sure that whatever we do in business, for instance, or whatever the government does, that it kind of sets this level playing field and democratizes as much as we can for South African society. And I think for me, the thing that is really kind of disheartening is youth unemployment. I mean, we saw the statistics the other day that youth unemployment for people under 25 is 67.4%, which is really, really scary kind of number. And there, we see that young people are being left out and being forgotten, really. And I guess one of the things that technology can do is, the discussion that we've been having in South Africa around data and around making sure that data is accessible to everybody, because is accessible to everyone in this country, because that means that now all of a sudden you could actually put in that job application that you need. You can learn new skills. There are all sorts of like online courses that young people can find online. And those are some of the things that we can really think about when we talk about democratizing and equalizing the playing field. I think the other thing that we do, and I'll just talk a little bit here about what 3 Words is doing, just in terms of addressing, right, is the fact that now everybody has an address. Everybody's on the map. And we know in South Africa that addresses are really, really critical for things like opening a business, which a lot of young people want to do. And this is the role that technology should play. Should be an enabler. Should be saying to young people, or to any South African really, that we know you want to do this thing, or you have been already doing this thing, but let's help you get to where you want to get.
Awesome. Just on the data cost for consumers, you're making a very compelling point that the price of data hinders social development. It hinders the kind of strategies that could be employed even by entrepreneurs to expand their businesses. The data is the backbone of business today. There certainly could very well be multiples of entrepreneurial activities that take place, either internet-based, online, e-commerce, businesses online, new programming that rides on the wave of 4G, but more accessible. Why is this call for lowering of data prices seem to be falling on deaf ears?
Yeah, I think part of it has to do with the legacy systems that this data structure has been built on, and the fact that, yes, there has been a lot of social activity and a lot of activism around this, and saying actually data costs really, really have the biggest impact, or the most negative impact, on the poorest in our society, right? And like, this should be addressed, and this is a huge injustice. But I think partially it has to do with the history of the industry, and the fact that a lot of sort of companies can charge a certain fee, and have been able to charge that fee and kind of keep their businesses going and keep their businesses thriving. And so when you don't necessarily see this big kind of threat to companies' bottom line, then maybe there is kind of the view that maybe let's just continue kind of doing the same things as we were doing before. I think it needs to come from I think the impact needs to be more to a company's bottom line, I think, before you kind of see any sort of action on that front. And I know there have been on the policy side, on the governance side, the Competition Commission, all of these sorts of institutions trying to get involved and trying to be kind of the arbiter for this. But I think, and that's great, and that should still continue. That work should still continue. There should continue to be social activism. But unfortunately, from the side of a company, I think they continue to kind of be able to survive. Not only survive, but to thrive and to make a good profit, even with a lot of the social activism we see around data.
So it seems to me that companies are short-termist in their thinking. Because also the fact that the South African economy has not been growing and the market is fairly constrained and divvied up between these few players. And which is why I suppose some companies have been exploring the African continent. But the other factor of profitability, at least in my observation, is data, to milk data prices while they still can. As to what happens to society and the social cost of this, doesn't seem that they thinking about that.
I mean, sure. I think that's sort of one way of looking at it, Mzu. But I also see a really encouraging trend, which has been other companies like Rain that are coming on board and saying, we're seeing that we can service South Africans. We believe that we can service South Africans better. And saying let's make a data-only network. And let's make sure that you're not charged out of bundle rates. All of these interesting things that I think talk to what South Africans have been being very vocal about. And so I see that, sure, you have a lot of sort of the incumbent companies that are kind of maybe continuing a little bit as on a business as usual approach. Maybe they are also taking on board different approaches, but I think it's also really encouraging to see the response from other players like Rain, for instance, that are trying to kind of fill that gap there. And I think competition is also another important aspect of it, that with more competition and with different models of how you can run such an enterprise, that we'll begin to see change. And maybe we'll begin to see that South Africans will be better serviced by the industry. Yeah.
I'm one of those who are rooting for companies like Rain and other tech startups. I think one of their weaknesses currently is sort of coverage. I think they still have limited coverage. As soon as they solve those problems, I think they can take off in a major way. How do you see the future of startups in South Africa and their role in solving problems associated with high levels of concentration? Because the point about data has to do with high levels of concentration. We have high data prices. We're paying a lot of money as consumers because the sector is concentrated. And to that, you also see it in the banking sector. Whenever you see concentration in the economy, there are super profits to be made from high prices. And regulation is one answer, which is the role of agencies such as the Competition Commission, and also pressure from government on these companies to cast sharper spotlight. But also tech startups they have a positive influence in changing the market structure. I think the example you're providing of Rain demonstrates why we need to look at problems as opportunities for startup solutions. What would be your take on that?
Yeah, so I definitely do think, that the South African ecosystem for tech startups is really, really growing. It's definitely obviously not on the scale of Silicon Valley and other places, but it's something that is taking shape, especially in Cape Town, which seems to be the hub for tech startups. You're finding a lot of companies trying to address a a lot of the needs that South Africans have, and also trying to break into those kind of legacy markets, whether it's banking. I know this is Michael Jordan again, but like Bank Zero, for instance. And I think it can only be a positive thing, really. But one thing that I want to mention about tech startups and entrepreneurship in general, especially when it comes to young people and with youth unemployment, we know that in order for you to be a successful entrepreneur in South Africa, for instance, you need to have capital, you need to have the requisite labor skills, you need to have a network, you need to have a little bit of cash. And what tends to happen, I think, in the startup scene, just like that can be replicated across other industries in the country, is that previously disadvantaged people are left out because they do not have
social capital,
the social capital that you require in order to make such a business work. So I think in as much as we see really, really positive growth for tech startups, really, really promising businesses that are saying we want to disrupt these traditional markets, I think that there's still some work to be done in terms of democratizing that and making sure that marginalized people can also be part of that. And I think in as much as this is a challenge, what's incredible to see is there are organizations like MEST Africa, as well as We Think Code, and BCX is also running a similar program where, in seeing the gaps that some disadvantaged youth, previously disadvantaged youth have, they try to kind of fill those and make sure that whatever idea that they have might actually see the light of day in the market. So,
I'm quite interested in making a follow-up on that because I think it's quite critical in how we enrich a startup ecosystem. I think you're right, we're not Silicon Valley. There are certain attributes that are present in Silicon Valley that we don't have, but it doesn't mean that we can't find ways that work for ourselves. I think Cape Town is already showing the way, but I think more can be done. For an example, the role of government in, not that we should always see government as a solution, but I certainly think that they are, given their resource endowments, given their institutional factor, that the state can be part of the solution. I mean, at times it's part of the problem, but it can also be part of the solution. I don't think we should ever discount the role of the state in nurturing economic development, in enriching the ecosystem for entrepreneurship, for startup economy. And I've seen a couple of countries that are launching venture capital, state-backed venture capital entities, and very much directed at solving some of the problems that you are highlighting. Because in a distorted society such as Africa, that has the kind of history that it has, especially with Black people who have not built sufficient networks that they can approach for startup to bootstrap or accessing startup capital, and also with the leadership teams of venture capital, not without biases. I mean, as someone who's worked in the public policy space, what do you see the role of the state as in helping to contribute to the startup ecosystem? I mean, there are other elements such as your universities, the density of entrepreneurs in an area. But what is the particular role of the state or that government can play?
So I think there are actually quite a few things that the government can do in this sense. And obviously because, the government has nodes in places that private sector doesn't necessarily. It has these amazing networks. It has universities. It has the colleges and all of that, which can be amazing vehicles for young people. And I think a lot of, we just discussed youth unemployment, but a lot of what young people would also need, I think, in order to see through their idea in terms of a tech startup, a lot of those things are skills, right? And a lot of the skills that people need, a lot of the skills that people need are not necessarily being serviced in the best way in universities at the moment, or in TVET colleges. Or those traditional institutions. And so offering places where young people can learn how to code or learn just any other skill. For instance, just as we saw with the nursing colleges and the teaching colleges and all of that, but just kind of these kind of tech nodes where young people can have a place to learn these sorts of skills, because you don't really see them being available in other places in a way that young people would actually be able to thrive upon with them. So I think a lot of that would really depend on that. And you do see a lot of these organizations now coming to the fore in Cape Town as well as in Johannesburg, where they're offering kind of these extracurricular skills, but that become extremely valuable in a tech startup type of environment.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, also given our particular circumstances in South Africa where the economy is not looking that great, the growth rates are projected at 1.5% by the end of 2018. And there is this negativity in the country, in the business sector, and also sort of the rise in policy uncertainty or regulatory uncertainty. It seems that we could very well be headed for an unsteady future, and also that the certain crisis points that we see and that could flare up. And I think someone said we must never let a good crisis go to waste. And I'm just wondering what critical points currently, because when there's this dark storm, we tend to take our eyes off the glimmers of light, or we, our imaginations to the future. Our imagination to the future tends to be blunted. What, in your view, looking beyond the storm, what can we see as potential opportunities for the country, for its youth, for its future growth and development?
Yeah, for sure. So I think we've touched on a couple of these already, but I do see, kind of above the horizon that with increasing competition and with changing of the structure of incumbent companies, that you will see the lowering cost of data. You will see that. And I think that's going to have a really, really positive impact on young people and on society, on accessibility, on all sorts of, on young people being able to, learn online, young people being able to start a business, to register a business, all of these sorts of things. I also see on the horizon a really, really interesting trend. So we have automation, which is coming up. And we already see this in South Africa with the mining industry that always shed every month or so. You hear, the mining industry has shed 2,000 or so jobs. And that is very much about the rise in automation. But I think this is an amazing opportunity for not just young people, but for South Africans in general, in order to diversify those skills and to be useful in other ways, and to learn a different skill. And because wherever you will have automation at some point in the supply chain, there will be a need for a human being in that. And so I think a really exciting opportunity are kind of the new kind of economic opportunities that are opened up for young people and for other South Africans with the rise of automation.
Awesome. And perhaps the last final question, which is about megatrends in tech. And you probably touched on some of these, but someone who's listening to this podcast and thinking, what are some of the megatrends in technology that we can think about in future, maybe 2 or 3 or more, as you think about them? And any implications for South Africa, if any? What would be your take working in the tech space? What are the conversations in the tech space?
So I think I'll highlight one here. One that's really, really interesting is voice. So how we as human beings will start interacting with our cars, with our mobile phones, with our homes in a different way. And we'll be able to talk to them and to tell them what we want them to do. I think voice is very, very exciting for that. Studies show that by 2020, 50% of the commands we'll be giving to our phones will be via voice. So it's not something that's really, really far away from us. So it's something that that's in the short to medium term will be impacting us. And I think that's really, really exciting. Just to give an example, for instance, with what 3 words we've been enabled in Mercedes-Benz cars. So now it means that you can talk to your car and say, hey, Mercedes, take me to Punk Braved Warriors, for instance.
Mm.
And that immediately means that you can start to use your navigation systems in a very, very easy and simple way, in ways that you hadn't really used them before.
Yeah.
And I think that's so interesting. And especially with languages. I mean, languages are really, really important for South Africans, and looking at how voice can be an enabler to people so that they can speak their own languages to their devices. And I think that's a really, really exciting frontier that's going to be hitting us really, really soon.
Awesome. So quite clearly there will be more efficiencies with the new technology, and possibly we will have more time for leisure or to explore our other potentialities that have been tied up in more menial and repetitive types of work that will now be able to, our voice will give command and it shall be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we look at tech megatrends, it's always really, really exciting and fun things that are happening, like I mentioned with voice. But I am cognizant of the fact that we are in South Africa and we still have a lot of kind of fundamental issues that we need to address. So, for instance, it's great that you can navigate by voice, but maybe some people, there's no roads where they live, or there's no, so making sure that that tech meets people's challenges where they are at that time, I think is also really, really important. And making sure that our society is kind of ready for these things. But at the same time, we also see that, many countries have been able to just like leapfrog, right? Be able to move to a completely different system without going through stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so those can be the exciting things that I think we'll be able to see in South Africa.
I think that's a great opportunity. I think that's a great place to end it, and highlighting opportunities for South Africa into the future. Thank you so much, Zama, for this podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed the discussion. And all the best with your work at 3words.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Mzu.
Thank you for tuning in to Perspectives with Mzu.